Hello guys, welcome back to my channel. What if Naruto used Izanagi to rewrite history and became an Ōtsutsuki god? Well then, looks like this is it, said a tired voice. You sure this is going to work? Sure, the Sharingan's absurd ability, the Izanagi, allowed one to cheat death, but this Naruto, said a very deep voice, skeptical of what its companion was planning. Yeah, I'm sure, Kurama, said Naruto, understanding why his friend would be concerned about his plan. After all, it wasn't every day that one gathered dozens of Sharingan eyes implanted into the remains of the Ten Tails body to act as a conduit, to use them to open a portal back in time. Now normally someone like Naruto would never go so far as to experiment with the eyes that were harvested from people long since dead. But he had little choice in the matter. After all, considering there was virtually nothing left of the elemental nations, what other recourse was there then to attempt going back in time and changing things? Flashback. During the battle with Kagaya, things had been going about as well as one could hope. He and Sasuke had been so close to sealing away Kagaya and ending things. Then things went straight to shit when two more Ōtsutsuki members arrived, Kinshiki and his foster son Momoshiki. Apparently these two were the reason why Kagaya had tried to make an army of Zetsu to fight against, as they planned on turning Kagaya into a Cinnabar panacea, which would grant them greater power and an extended lifespan. As expected, things quickly deteriorated when they showed up. There were not only Kagaya to contend with, but seeing the power both Sasuke and Naruto were producing, they stated they were going to devour them as well. Then, as if that wasn't bad enough, yet another Ōtsutsuki clan member, this one being descended of Hamura, Hagoromo's brother, had shown up sensing the chakra of not three separate members of his clan. But he didn't come here for their chakra. Oh no. He came to stall them, as he was going to drop the entire moon on them and kill everyone, as that was, he said, was his family's purpose should Kagaya come back. Things went downhill from there. During the fight, Naruto lost his left arm, and Sasuke suffered mortal wounds. So, they even had a chance at winning. Sasuke had Sakura transplant his left arm to Naruto, along with his Rinnegan eye, as his Sharingan has already been gouged out. Unfortunately, Momoshiki saw this and tried to kill them, but Kakashi got in his way. He tried to give Sakura as much time as she could to get Naruto's new parts connected properly, but Momoshiki proved to be too much for him, as Kakashi was then turned into what they called a Cinnabar panacea, essentially an overpowered chakra pill. Before he could eat it, however, Sakura interrupted him, as by this point Naruto's own chakra was beginning to stabilize itself with the new power he had gained and beginning to heal himself. However, Sakura eventually met the same fate as Kakashi and was turned into a chakra pill herself. Before he could eat this one, however, Naruto had healed enough to get back into the fight. Not that it was much of one at that point. The other Ōtsutsuki had exhausted themselves fighting one another and proved to be no match for a revitalized Naruto with both yin and yang of the Six Paths chakra, as well as a Rinnegan. Blinded in his rage, he tore Momoshiki to pieces for turning Kakashi and Sakura into glorified chakra pills, which was an irreversible thing. Next, he went after Kinshiki, as Tonari kept Kagaya occupied. Quickly figuring out his weakness was hand-to-hand combat, he proceeded to beat his face until it looked no different than ground meat. Then finally, it was Kagaya's turn, as she had defeated and taken the chakra of Tonari, as even with his Tenseigan, he was no match for Kagaya. And so, they engaged in battle once more. Though it soon came apparent that Kagaya was losing the battle. With the tailed beasts inside of her fighting her control, not to mention that the chakra she took from Tonari was not near enough to fully recover, her defeat came quickly and brutally. Before finishing her off, he demanded she release the infinite Tsukuyomi and free everyone. But the answer he got filled him with dread. She explained that upon the arrival of Momoshiki and Kinshiki, she sped up the process of turning everyone into Zetsu to help her defeat everyone. By this point everyone would have been turned into the clones, with no way of turning them back. In his rage and mounting despair, he activated the Rinnegan to read her mind for the truth. Learning that she wasn't lying, however, nearly broke him. Throwing her weak and battered body off to the side, she tumbled as the blonde began feeling the full effects of everything that had happened thus far. Not even the comforting words of the Biju were of much help. But then a thought came to Naruto. Sasuke had mentioned a technique called the Izanagi. That by sacrificing a single Sharingan, one could manipulate reality enough to defy death. Trying to fend off succumbing to his despair of failing everyone he knew and loved, he came up with an insane plan. If he could gain enough Sharingan, and with his new power, he could effectively rewrite everyone being turned into Zetsu. Hell, why not take it a step further? Change history enough so that they wouldn't even have to go through this hellish war. And he knew just where to get the Sharingan eyes too. As disgusting as it was, Danzo had nearly every active Sharingan eye harvested from the dead Uchiha clan members for his own use. As long as whatever tank he had them in was still intact, he could use them. But first, he would even more power to pull off time travel, and seeing the bodies of the 4 Ōtsutsuki around him, he knew just how to get it. Flashback end. And so here he was, with the power of the 9 Biju at his back, the chakra and power of 4 separate Ōtsutsuki members, a hell of a lot of Sharingan, and one insane plan that given his luck might just work. Of course, taking the power of each Ōtsutsuki member came with changes. His hair turned as white as theirs, and his other eye morphed into that Tenseigan that Tonari had. Sasuke's Rinnegan fully evolving into a Rinne Sharingan as well. As with most of the clan, he also grew horns, but thankfully they stayed small, being like Hagoromo's, if just a bit bigger. After checking, he found that he had not gained a third eye like Kagaya did. Perhaps that was because he didn't actually eat a chakra fruit like she did. Not like it mattered much at this point anyway. Thanks to the Rinnegan's ability to read minds, he was able to glean how to use his soon-to-be new abilities before he absorbed the 4 before devouring them whole like 2 of them had planned to do to him. His old self would have been disgusted to do such a thing, but now. A broken man being held together on the mad hope of fixing everything on a massive gamble. He honestly didn't even care anymore. Well, looks like they're finally ready. Naruto said, as the Sharingan eyes all around the circle he had formed out of the remains of the 10 tails to act as a gate. Well kid, hopefully this works and we aren't completely torn apart by what we're about to do, said Goyuki from inside of Naruto. The other Biju agreeing with him. At first Naruto wanted to make the trip alone, as it was highly probable he would be able to survive without Kurama inside of him, but they had already made it this far together, and the fox, let alone the other tailed beasts, weren't going to let him face this alone. Giving a small smile at that, he activated the makeshift portal. Each Sharingan eye opened up and glowed, and a swirling vortex soon opened up. Except unlike the Kamui technique, it looked like someone took a bunch of different paint colors and was pouring them down a drain. Wasn't a pretty thing to look at. You better hurry it up if you really want to do this. The Izanagi technique was meant to be a one-time use, and the eyes are closing, said Kurama, as the eyes were indeed rapidly closing. Taking a deep breath, Naruto quickly entered the portal before the last eyes closed, cutting him off from the elemental nations, at least for now he hoped. At first, the myriad of colors and a sense of vertigo was the only thing Naruto felt as he went through the portal. Then, without warning, pain. Terrible, terrible pain. It felt like every fiber of his body was trying to be pulled apart at once. Thinking fast, he went and tried to summon a Susanoo to protect him. It was incomplete and malformed, as his haste and it being his first time using it with his new powers he summoned a ribcage, and multiple disfigures skeletal limbs to add further protection than just a ribcage, instead of a fully formed humanoid battle avatar like the other Uchiha had been able to do. The protection was mostly holding but having to constantly use chakra to maintain his shield as it was constantly being dissolved. But that wasn't the worst part. The Biju were disappearing from inside of him. They had theorized that one of the main problems with their attempted time traveling, they wouldn't be able to exist in 2 places at once, and would either be annihilated completely, or in some fashion be fused to their counterparts in the new reality they were going to. And honestly, either option was preferable to the ruined wasteland that their former world was in, waiting for a slow and lonely death. Naruto, I don't know how much longer I can hold on, said Kurama, feeling and trying its best to resist the pull the fox had been feeling, the other Biju having already been pulled away. Even though this was a possibility, still, said Naruto in a somber voice, not wanting his last friend to be taken as well. Bah! What kind of attitude is that? We both know with your dumb luck I'll be reborn in some way or another, so that just means we just must find each other again. Your new powers might have allowed you to survive unsealing me, but we will always be linked, Naruto, never forget that. Bellowed Kurama, trying to give Naruto hope that they would see each other again, despite the fear in its gut that they wouldn't. That eased Naruto's nerves somewhat. After all, he just had to hope he would find Kurama again. Hey, hope. That's really all Naruto had left at this point, didn't he? Gaining the absurd level of power, he did, doing the unsavory things the old him would never even consider, all for the sake of fixing everything that went wrong. Hell, maybe even with the mass Izanagi he had uses, maybe even a few people that would have otherwise been dead would be alive in the new reality. That would be nice. Already he could feel Kurama as well had been pulled away like the others, leaving him alone. Slowly he felt a pull on his mind and very soul as he neared what seemed like the end of the portal. He could see no physical end to it, but what he felt he could only assume he was near the end, as it wasn't like the pain of his body being destroyed like earlier. As he felt himself getting closer to the end, as much as he could, he hoped he would meet everyone again, and everything would turn out all right. When Naruto finally got to the end of the portal, he knew he wouldn't have any control of where he would be landing, but still. He would have preferred not being ejected out of the hole into the sky, like a cannonball being fired. It didn't take long for him to start raising into the air, but now he had a new problem. His landing strategy. He hadn't mastered his new abilities well enough to use the teleportation as freely as Kagaya could. So, his best bet was to summon his odd-looking Susanoo armor, as while he wouldn't really take damage, his arrival would still make a rather loud bang. Assuming his mere presence wasn't sensed already. Eventually unceremoniously landing in a huge crash that shook the surroundings area, Naruto deactivated the Susanoo and looked at his surroundings and immediately frowned. He was in swamp-like wasteland. The trees, what few there were twisted and gnarled into unusual forms for trees of any kind. The ponds of varying sizes that he could see were slowly bubbling, most likely releasing toxic gas. The ground itself was cracked and devoid of any plant life unless you counted the dead trees. Just where the hell did he end up? The toxic area he had landed in didn't really bother him, having been subjected to poisons to build resistance and immunities to it when training with the toads. Though for them it was more so they could fight better against the snake summons, after Orochimaru had defected from Konoha and their summoners became enemies. But he highly doubted he ended up in any summon realm after the jump. Sensing someone behind him, he quickly turned around, spawning truth-seeking orbs in case of attack, only to see the person was kneeling in the Dageza position, or basically the begging for one's life position. The bow involves kneeling directly on the ground and bowing to prostrate oneself while touching one's head to the floor. It is used to show deference to a person of higher status, as a deep apology and to express the desire for a favor from said person. "Ihumble beseech you great one, please let me serve you," yelled the person in front of Naruto, now identifying the person as a woman by the sound of her voice, not that he could otherwise tell with being only to see her tanned skin and short white hair. Staring at her dumbfounded for a few moments, he dispelled the truth-seeking orbs. Sensing she was being earnest in her odd request, he decided to go along with it and see just who the hell she was. All right. And you are? Naruto said, trying to get her name, and hopefully some information on where he was. He could sense a fair amount of chakra within the young woman in front of him, easily above the standard cage. But he had never seen nor heard of her during the war. He sincerely hoped that she, based on how snake-like her chakra felt, was a summoner for the snake summons or something, as otherwise things were going to get problematic. As even though he survived the portal jump, didn't mean he had succeeded in going back in time. After all, the Biju made sure to go through the possibilities of just what else could happen. And even then, there were plenty of random outcomes that could happen regardless. But first things first. Just who was this woman? Earlier, a young woman sat in a meditative stance in the desolate wasteland she called home. The woman has a light tan complexion and white hair. The serious look upon her face takes away a bit from her beauty, and that along with her manly demeanor leads many to mistaken her for a man at first, especially with her general lack of femininity. Of course, her very generous bust and well-proportioned figure would say otherwise to that. She had come here to hide away from those who would pursue her, either to wield her power for their own, or to simply kill her for her bloodline. Such was the life of one whose parentage was one of a great evil being. Unfortunately for her, despite not wanting to follow in her father's footsteps, many were either too fearful or just didn't care, and wanted her controlled or dead. And so, she decided to hide in places that no sane being would. The less inhabitable, the better. While it made getting sustenance a challenge, being an offspring of an evil dragon did grant some benefits, like not needing to feed as much. After all, back when the Yamada no Orochi forced an elderly couple to sacrifice a daughter to it, it only demanded one per year. A snake dragon as powerful as it didn't really need to eat much, having essentially evolved to the point where it required little food. After all, if all dragons needed to eat to fill their stomachs on a regular basis like most other beings, then there would be a severe population decrease all over. So here she was, hiding in an area where her progenitor had ruined via his own poison, which was strong enough to kill gods. While she didn't like the idea of using an area ruined by his poison, she would do what was necessary to survive. Another reason to be in this area was that she could train in peace. Privacy allowed her the chance to try and control the raging dragon blood within her. While the Yamada no Orochi is said to be a snake with 8 heads and tails, it was more akin to a dragon that looked like a snake. But that aside, she was attempting to gain better control of her dragon powers, when suddenly she felt it. Some kind of portal had opened in the sky above her, and looking at it and the nauseating cascade of colors from inside of it soon followed by an ungodly amount of energy that was soon to emerge from the portal. And it was increasing as she guessed who or whatever was soon to come out of it. And from the feel of it, it quite easily dwarfed her at her best. Which meant that someone exceedingly powerful had found her, and she didn't think she would be likely to run away unscathed when dealing with this being. Even if she went into blood riot to increase her strength, the power difference between her and this being was simply too much. Hell, she was quacking in fear already, never having someone this powerful sent after her before. Had Susanoo finally gotten tired of this long game of chasing her, and sent someone more powerful to end her like he had her progenitor? Based on the potent chakra she was feeling, it was one of the more likely scenarios. She didn't have much more time to wonder as the being came shooting out of the portal into the air. Based on the size, they seemed to be humanoid. When they seemed to reach the apex of their ascent and then started to fall, she saw something that made her breath hitch. The person summoned a damned battle avatar to obviously break their fall. While it looked odd and malformed, that was most likely due to them not needing to fully form it. There were very few beings with chakra that could form battle avatars like that. Meaning that she was most likely dealing with a very powerful member of the Uchiha clan, as their Sharingans were said to be able to summon such things. But that couldn't be it either. No one from the Uchiha clan currently could have had someone so powerful. They had enough big-headed morons that they would have boasted about someone with such powerful chakra like this being. And the general feeling the person gave off, even from the distance between them, was much warmer and kind, yet sad and hurt. No, from the feeling he was giving off, he was not here to hunt her. Her senses regarding people had not betrayed her before. And so, despite the fear of overwhelming power this person possessed, she hoped this person could be reasoned with, as something inside of her was telling her to meet them. And so, here Miyabi was prostrating herself before this strangely dressed being. Wearing tattered white robes that seemed like would be worn by nobility of some kind. Which she supposed he was, considering the kind of power he had. After all, in the realm of yokai, the more powerful one was, the higher they were held in esteem by the rest of them. Which was why the Kyuubi was the one in charge of Kyoto and the ley lines there. But with his appearance, it appears he had been attacked, as there were plenty of greedy and jealous yokai that would love nothing more than to try and steal the powers of others to make themselves greater. It was this line of thought that gave her hope that by helping this yokai, whatever kind they were, even though they were more powerful than her as well, she could prove she wasn't evil despite where she came from. But so many were blinded by the shadow cast by the Yamada no Orochi over her, they couldn't see past it for who she really was. But with what her senses were telling her of this person, nay compelling her to kneel before, was possibly her best and only shot at being free of the hatred and fear plaguing her life. Naruto on the other hand just stared at her dumbfounded, not too sure what to say or do now. She wanted to serve him. Just what was she on about? Perhaps her training in these cursed lands had gotten to her, and she was effectively high out of her mind. Or confused him with someone else. Sir, my name is Miyabi. No family name. I am a kunoichi of Jonin rank and would be honored to be in your employ. Said Miyabi, in a professional tone. This was her one chance to make an impression and hoped it worked. Naruto was perplexed. She wanted to serve him. But oh wait. He did take the robes of the dead Ōtsutsuki, as his clothes were shredded, and they were some high-quality stuff. Probably thought he was a noble of some kind and serving him would give her some benefits. He knew her claim of Jonin had some merit, considering he could sense her chakra was well above Kage. Thinking on it, he desperately needed information. While her claim of Jonin title gave him some degree of hope that he had in fact jumped back in time, he also knew something was wrong thanks to the woman in front of him. She wasn't human, at all. Even Orochimaru, as horrid as his true nature really was, he could tell the snake summoner was still human to some degree. The woman in front of him at best could take the form of a human, but in reality, it wasn't. This meant that the wish he had imparted onto the Izanagi portal to go back in time had been warped, and instead whatever the hell this new world had become. Shit. At this point, he really didn't have a choice in the matter, did he? Letting out a sigh, he straightened himself up and looked at her bowing form. Very well, Miyabi. From here on out you are under my employ. My name is Naruto Yu, he stops himself from saying. No. He wasn't exactly Naruto Uzumaki anymore, was he? In this new world, where things were vastly different, and he himself had gone through great changes, he couldn't go by his old name now, could he? No. He had effectively put his old life behind him as soon as he took the powers of those 4 Ōtsutsuki members for his own. He was now Naruto Ōtsutsuki, he said, earning a gasp from Miyabi. Slowly lifting her head, not believing he laid claim to be an Ōtsutsuki, she looked upon his face and froze. It was there, the one undeniable proof of one being an Ōtsutsuki, in his left eye. The fabled Rinne Sharingan, the Ido Jutsu that spawned both the Rinnegan and the Sharingan, having the powers of both. This, what could she even call him now? This was not some yokai who had made it big, oh no, this was so much more. This was something that would, if she was successful, guarantee her safety, as well as having found a worthy master to serve. She prided herself on being a strong and capable ninja, and having a master of such pedigree was more than she could ever hope for. Why yes, my lord Ōtsutsuki. I shall do everything in my power to serve you. Miyabi said with conviction. Nodding, Naruto looked directly at her. Now, I'm going to need you to answer some questions of mine, if you don't mind. He sincerely hoped things were not as warped as he was starting to think they were. If so, then things just got infinitely more complicated. One lengthy conversation later, that and a string of other curses went through Naruto's head as he learned just how much things had changed from his original world. He chose and worded his questions carefully, to not reveal why he hadn't known much of the current world, then ignorant of the changes. He explained he had been in a kind of self-exile before he showed up before her, and his teleportation technique was a complete accident that he had ended up where he did. She thankfully bought that, as apparently the Ōtsutsuki had basically disappeared from the world much like he claimed, and no one knew where they went, or if they any main family ones like Naruto technically was now were even still alive. But it was more widely known that the Uchiha, Senju, Uzumaki, and Hyuga were the descendants of the Ōtsutsuki like in his original world. For the most part all that seemed to be the same, aside from the fact the elemental nations didn't exist and instead all the ninja resided in a country now called Japan for the most part, having their own secret villages still. While still not exactly close allies, they would still unite together if something threatened them. This made the yokai, and by extension the Shinto faction, were quite a force to reckon with. What was surprising was that aside from the shinobi faction, there was also the army the Shinto faction had called the 13 Court Guard Squads, which resided in their own pocket dimension. They were effectively like the Einherjar of the Norse afterlife Valhalla, another thing she had to explain to him, as there were a multitude of religions and their resulting factions. While technically spirits, they were still technically living and could still be killed. It was believed that after being killed at that point there was no coming back, and either just ceased to exist or were immediately forced into reincarnation. Either way, while things were drastically different with literal gods and such beings existing now, at least it was very likely that his old friends were alive again, even if they didn't remember him. That was enough for him. Better to be as if he never existed to them to begin with than for him to never see them alive again. But what to do now? He technically had no place in this new world. He didn't even know what became of the Biju, as it was likely they had been turned into yokai by what he had been told. While it was very unlikely that Kurama would remember him given how reality had been warped, he still had to try and find his friend, if only to assure himself that the grumpy fox was okay. Which means he would have to go to Kyoto and meet with the current leader of the yokai themselves, Yusaka the Nine-Tailed Fox. He wasn't sure how things would go over with him being an Ōtsutsuki, with virtually the entire world believing them to have vanished centuries ago, and one showing up, with the offspring of the Yamada no Orochi no less. Things could get very ugly, very fast if not handled properly. After all, the entirety of the yokai, the ninja, and worse the Shinto gods would be very interested in him for various reasons. Not all of them good. Now he needed to meet with this Yusaka woman but couldn't simply walk about the city without causing a massive uproar. Especially if there was an alternate dimensional, Naruto Uzumaki, or a Menma like during the limited Tsukuyomi he had gotten stuck in once. And while he was able to pass off on his severe lack of knowledge on that he hadn't been part of this world, but if he went on asking about specific people he should otherwise know nothing about. Now that would get her suspicious. And he didn't need his new allies suspicious of him already. Miyabi. Naruto said, getting her attention. I know you'll have reservations against this, but I've decided. We're going to Kyoto to meet with this Yusaka. Kyoto, inside the yokai palace. Inside of an office, Yusaka let out a sigh. She appears to be a young woman with a voluptuous figure and very long blonde hair with matching eyes. She is a woman with delicate facial features and her eyebrows are cut very short and round, a symbol of nobility. Her hair is tied in a loose ponytail, reaching all the way down to her legs when standing that ends in a spiral, with taut bandages to keep it in place. She usually wears a traditional shrine maiden attire, and over that she wore a white coat held closed by a red ribbon and a golden crown. While she was the ruler of the yokai, it wasn't exactly a job she enjoyed. After all, she had to keep peace not only with the various yokai clans, but also between them and the ninja clans as well. While normally one would think as they were all being who could utilize chakra they would at least try to get along, but it wasn't that simple. There were yokai that still didn't like that the ninja were effectively humans who could use chakra, all thanks to Hagoromo Ōtsutsuki who granted the ability to use it. Then there were those amongst the ninja who viewed themselves as superior with their chakra due to the numerous techniques and abilities that they had created that she would, at least secretly, admit the yokai would have never come up with. Yet at the same time it was thanks to the efforts of Hagoromo and his brother Hamura that the yokai far and wide were now unified as they were today. Their desire for peace and unity helped bring the warring clans together. Even some other monster clans from outside of Japan as a whole, or at least the members of those species wanting to lead peaceful lives came and settled down. Of course, this led to many other factions being weary of them. After all, not only were the Ōtsutsuki immensely powerful to be on par with gods, but they had given the ability to use chakra even if it wasn't on par with them to others. That along with the Shinto faction's military of the 13 court guard squads made them substantially more powerful. What was really a problem, however, were the devils of the Christian religion. Many had grown suspicious of when they had revealed the evil peace system as a claim to regain their lost numbers via reincarnating humans into low-class devils. What was the real problem being that it could also reincarnate virtually any other being into a half-devil if they weren't human. And due to their own laws regarding reincarnated devils, if one rebelled against the king, the one who turned them, they were to be labeled criminals and to be hunted and slaughtered with extreme prejudice. This made it difficult for the ones who had been forcibly or unwillingly reincarnated, as the evil pieces could work on those who had recently died. After all, can exactly get a no from someone who had died. While the devils could not reincarnate someone who was too powerful, it wasn't an issue to do it with someone who had yet to reach their true potential and reincarnate someone young. Which is why some believed that the devils would try and go for the children of powerful yokai clans, or the ninja clans for that matter. After all, some of the more prominent ninjas like Madara Uchiha and Hashirama Senju still had existing relatives, not to say that other ninjas wouldn't make a good choice for reincarnation. For this reason, the ninja clans effectively closed their doors to devil kind. While this worked for the most part, there were still those ninja that had abandoned and left their villages for one reason or another and would at times go to the devils for protection. But this was few and far between, as the ninja were usually efficient at taking care of traitors. And that wasn't the worst of it. The devils tried to eradicate the Nekosho who had decided to live in the underworld, because one of them had supposedly gone mad and killed her master. Given the nature of devils, it wouldn't have surprised Yusaka that it had in some measure been an act of self-defense, as there were a decent number of devils in control of peerages that could freely abuse them without reprimand. After all, they basically owned that person after using the piece on them, until they got promoted to a higher class and could be on their own. Not that the old hardliners on the Devil Council would ever allow a reincarnated devil, let alone one that hadn't been human before, to gain standing in their society. But after the Nekosho Kuroka had killed her master and gone into hiding, the devils were whipped into a frenzy and tried to kill her entire race. Really though, the devil in question wasn't even that important of one, merely a low-ranking noble at best with no ties to any actual important devils. Yet they still tried to eradicate hundreds for the one, virtually insignificant one that had died. It wouldn't have surprised her part of the reason they did so and not gone the diplomatic route with her, made her believe that they were trying to cover up exactly why Kuroka killed her master. And considering how the devils were already in a frenzy and ready to kill the poor Nekosho, it would have been too late to save the once word got to her in Kyoto. Had it not been for. She was interrupted from her thought by the feeling of a large pair of breasts and slender arms wrapping around her waist in a hug. My Yusaka, something must have you pretty concerned if you couldn't even sense me, said a playful voice. Smiling at her old friend, Yusaka turned to her fellow nine-tailed fox and friend. Izuna, what a surprise. What bring you here? She asked her old friend. Like her, Izuna was also blonde, had bright red eyes, and very attractive. She wore what looked like a shrine maiden outfit, only the shirt had no sleeves. She also wore a short skirt and nearly thigh-high socks. Around her waist she also has a red obi. She regularly has her 9 tails and fox ears for all to see. What, can't I come and visit my dearest friend without much invitation? She asked with a nervous smile, letting Yusaka out of her hug, now standing a couple feet away from her. Letting out a small sigh, she realized what Izuna was doing. Something had happened, either by her getting into trouble, or there was some other serious matter. Likely the latter, as she wasn't trying to butter her up with compliments. Izuna, I appreciate what you're trying to do, but you might as well tell me now what's bothering you, said Yusaka. Izuna really was a good friend, doing her best to help essay the burdens of overseeing Kyoto, as well as looking after Kuno when she herself couldn't. Izuna let out a sigh, and reluctantly pulled out a small piece of paper and showed it to Yusaka, who narrowed her eyes at it. It was a picture of the Rinne Sharingan, the most revered and respected thing amongst the yokai and ninja. While the two didn't always get along, even the respected the Ōtsutsuki and the original bearers of the famed dojutsu. Especially those clans directly descended from Hagoromo and Hamura. Izuna, you and I both know that there have been many who lay claim to being direct descendants to the Ōtsutsuki, without their bloodline watered down like the other clans. Why would you bring me this? Unless it has something to do with that massive chakra spike that was picked up by the censors, asked Yusaka, now irritated. There had been plenty of pretenders in the past, and a few who had done some rather immoral acts to try and recreate the power of the original Ōtsutsuki. There was something special about their power, that even trying to use the powerful relics they left behind left many who tried to use them wishing they had never tried to steal them. After all, having your life force drained out of you at a rapid pace tended to do that. The person who brought this claims that it does. And that they have sworn themselves to this person, and that they wish to speak with you, said a serious Izuna. So even you're taking this seriously then? Just who is the person that would even remotely make you think they were telling the truth? Asked Yusaka. After all, Izuna was not a fool. A flirt but not stupid. Taking a moment, knowing Yusaka wouldn't like the answer, she answered. Miyabi. At that Yusaka knew that things had just gotten immediately more complicated and a great deal more serious. She immediately began following Izuna to where Miyabi was. Just how in the hell is she involved in all of this, that she would risk coming here of all places? After Naruto told Miyabi that he wanted to meet Yusaka, she could fully understand why. He was an Ōtsutsuki, and she was the current leader of the yokai. Even if she wasn't in charge of the ninja as well, she had decent enough standing with that to smooth things over. The only problem, Miyabi was going to have to sneak into Yusaka's palace to secure a meeting with her, as she would otherwise be attacked on the spot. Yusaka however would at least hear her out, as she felt bad for her for being persecuted for simply existing and tried to help her out as best she could. While she didn't know exactly who or what the girl's mother was, it mattered little to her in the end. Well, until the god Susanoo caught wind of the poor girl. Having fought and defeated her ancestor, and having a horrid scar from their battle, he feared what she would become. Not only for the original evil dragon, but its horrid spawn, Orochimaru. He was an even worse monster than his father had ever been. Not wanting a repeat of either, he wanted her head. But there were those who disagreed with him, saying while understandable, if they raised and treated her right, then there would be no reason for her to turn out like those who shared her blood. Even the ninja got involved, not so much of the innocence of the child, but more so they were soldiers. If they could train the girl, then she would be at the very least effective against dealing with Orochimaru. While not something Yusaka liked, at least most them were also against Susanoo being a damned fool. However, he was too bullheaded to listen to reason, and attempted to kill her anyway. He had been stopped of course, by a very irate Amaterasu, but the damage had been done, and Miyabi had disappeared not to be heard of for years. But now here she was back in Kyoto, having mistakenly gone to Izuna's room when searching for Yusaka. Izuna was of course stunned that she had appeared before her. She was further surprised when Miyabi pulled out a piece of paper detailing the Rinne Sharingan of all things and told her that she needed to speak with Yusaka immediately. After that Izuna had departed, and here she waited in Izuna's luxurious room. A bit much for her tastes, but then again, she wasn't here to critique Izuna's choice in decor. The door to the room burst open, and Miyabi immediately went to her blade on instinct. Before she could draw it, she had been enveloped in a hug by Yusaka. Stunned, she could only stammer at the physical contact she was getting. Before she could respond, Yusaka pulled away with her hands still on Miyabi's shoulder and looked at her. "My, how you've grown into a beautiful young woman," she said, making Miyabi blush a bit more. However, Yusaka chose that moment to whack her upside the head, and lightly glare at her. "Do you know how worried I was about you? For years I feared something terrible had befallen you, and then here you pop up before me years later like nothing happened." stated an irate Yusaka. Her gaze softened as she grabbed Miyabi in another hug. But in the end, I'm just glad you've been okay. At that point, despite the slight pain from being hit, Miyabi slowly returned the hug, as awkward as it was. Izuna, not wanting to be left out, decided to wrap her arms around both, which was making things worse for Miyabi, who blushed harder, not being used to such affection. Sadly, they eventually had to let go, and get down to business. As overjoyed to see you alive and well, Miyabi, you do owe an explanation as to why you decided to show up now of all times. Yusaka said, a serious look on her face. Miyabi nodded, and slowly pulled out an orb from a pocket in her white with black trim haori. In her hand was a fist-sized orb bearing the symbol of the Rinne Sharingan, which put both Izuna and Yusaka on edge. I assume you're aware of the huge power spike that happened a few days ago. This orb is related to that. If you'll trust me, I'm going to call the one who generated that power for a talk. Miyabi said in a neutral tone. Naruto had given her the orb to call him. It was meant, when activated, would alert Naruto that it was okay to talk. If destroyed, it meant something had gone wrong, and he would come and rescue her. She tried to argue against that, saying that if things did go bad then he should flee, as he was far too important the factions of Japan to die. Even though she had only been with him a few days, and Ōtsutsuki being found alive was far too important a thing to allow to die. Yusaka and Izuna both shared a look, and a silent conversation took between them. However, Miyabi had done it. She had supposedly met a member of the Ōtsutsuki if what she was hinting at was true. Moreover, they wanted to talk with Yusaka. This was huge. Nay, world-shaking. Kaguya herself was strong enough to take on several gods, and while her children were not as strong as her, they were still a force to be reckoned with. But eventually there were no more pure Ōtsutsuki, and only their diluted blood existed in their descendants. She wasn't sure how the ninja would take to one just showing up out of the blue like this, but she doubted they would be fool enough to try to reject him in any fashion. While they still had doubts of her claim, the new Miyabi would not simply return like this without it being important enough to risk herself. With a nod from Izuna, Yusaka simply said, yes. With that, Miyabi channeled her chakra into the orb to activate it. It glowed a bright purple, before raising from her hand, then floated a few feet away from them. It then turned pitch black before expanding into and becoming a swirling vortex. Then, it hit them. An overwhelming amount of power that exceeded by a wide margin of anyone on the room. Were it not for the feeling of warmth coming from the one generating it, it would have been substantially worse to try and withstand it. Then, appearing through was a figure clad solely in white, elegant robes. Standing at around 5'10", they could see the figure had snow-white hair, and small horns on the top of their head, not unlike Oni. They couldn't see his face as it was lowered as he came through the portal, closing behind him. I'm very glad you decided to meet with my Lady Yusaka. Though I was not expecting there to be another for this meeting. Said Naruto, his voice having gotten deeper and richer as he properly allowed his body to go through the changes from taking as much Ōtsutsuki chakra as he had. At this, Miyabi immediately got on one knee. I'm terribly sorry, but when I went looking for Lady Yusaka, I found Lady Izuna instead on accident. I swear, Izuna is just as trustworthy as Yusaka, so please forgive me. Afraid for a moment that the possibly Ōtsutsuki would strike Miyabi, as some nobles would strike servants for less offensives, the man merely laughed and waved off the apology. Nah, it's all good, Miyabi. If you trust her, then that's good enough for me. From what I can sense, they're both good people. Naruto said, putting Yusaka and Izuna at ease, and slight confusion as to how he spoke so casually. While not much was known about the Ōtsutsuki, they hadn't expected one to speak so informally as this one did. Now then, Naruto said, bringing his face up, making Yusaka and Izuna gasp at the sight of his eyes. The Rinne Sharingan in the left eye, and what appeared to be a Byakugan with a lotus symbol in his right. They had never even heard of this. Just what was going on here? I believe I have you at a disadvantage still. I know your names, yet you don't know mine. My name is Naruto Ōtsutsuki, and it is a pleasure to meet you both. Now, we have much to discuss. Said Naruto in a cheery tone. This made the two Kitsune women blush at his smile. After all, it was hard not to. While appearing to be a young man, that hardly took away from his handsomeness. With his aura and the sheer potency of his chakra coming off him, it was hard for them to not react in such a way. It was going to be hard to concentrate with a few days later. Yusaka let out a tired sigh, getting ready for the meeting she had with the respective shinobi heads. After getting over her initial shock of having met an Ōtsutsuki, they got down to discussing what it was he wanted. Which turned out wasn't much. With his power and pedigree, he could have wanted control of Kyoto and the ley lines themselves, and while it would be a bit rocky at first, she had little doubt that someone as strong as him wouldn't be able to handle it. Not to mention that it would be likely he would have had a great deal of support. But he didn't want it. Izuna even straight out asked if themselves as his wives was that he desired, and his reaction was rather cute and noble. He blushed and stammered a bit that he didn't want to force them, or anyone for that matter, into marrying him. She was surprised by what he did want. To simply live amongst them peacefully. And to help introduce him to the ninja clans. While she suspected he would want to meet them, it wasn't so simple. Hell, they would likely be more than happy to meet him. But the real problem lay in the fact he is an Ōtsutsuki. Other pantheons still remembered the power Kagaya had long ago, before madness claimed her and had to be sealed by her children. But neither of them had the Rin Sharingan, nor this Tensagan for that matter. But here she was, at a round table with the respective main leaders of the ninja. From right to left, a huge muscular man with great lighting powers. It was believed this was due to someone in his family at some point being descended from Raijin, the god of thunder. Mei Terumi. A beautiful woman with the ability to manipulate lava and burning mist. It was said she also had the blood of a fire deity, but it wasn't confirmed. She had a somewhat unstable personality, being she had been looking for a husband, but none had the fortitude to handle her and it affected her greatly. Onoki of both scales. A very old, short man with a bulbous nose, yet with one of the most dangerous techniques the ninja had of atomic disintegration. He would also be the most likely to be a problem for Naruto wanting to interact with the ninja, if only due to his nature as a cautious man, possibly viewing Naruto as a threat. Rasa. An auburn-haired man with dark eyes, able to use the magnetic release to control metallic particles. She suspected he had a utilitarian-like mindset and had an odd habit of putting value to things. And lastly, Sarutobi Hiruzen. Around the same age as Onoki, he had a kindly grandfather feel and appearance to him. His was one of the few clans who had accepted the yokai wholeheartedly and were practically fully integrated with the monkey yokai. This made him related to some degree to the great sage, Sun Wukong. I thank you all for coming on such short notice. I appreciate it, said Yusaka bowing slightly. Well, you did say it was urgent, and directly related to the huge surge of chakra that was felt over a week ago. I assume you have news, or even identified the cause of it if you called us all here. Said Sarutobi. I was hoping the same thing. Otherwise this would simply be a huge waste of time. Said Rasa, wanting to know if this being was a threat to his people. You are indeed correct, the one who generated that power has actually come forward peacefully to speak with me. Said Yusaka, earning suspicious looks from some of the leaders. Oh really? Peacefully? I find it hard to believe that someone who generated enough power to outclass Madara Uchiha and Hashirama Senju in their prime would come in peace. Said Onoki, not at all believing things were that simple. He and Sarutobi were among the few ninjas still alive who remembered Madara and Hashirama, and how powerful they were. He fully believed that the being who commanded that power was a serious threat and needed to know more about it. Rasa however gave Yusaka a calculating gaze. While he shared Onoki's skepticism over this, a larger part of him was hopefully it was true. First and foremost, it was his duty to keep his people safe, and someone powerful enough to outclass all of them coming in peace was the best-case scenario. Even altogether he doubted they could stand against someone that strong. Well, spit it out then. What does this person even want? And for that matter, who even is it? Said an impatient A. Despite A's rudeness, I am curious. What exactly does this person want? And moreover, you said this person came to you willingly, so does that mean they are still here in Kyoto and we'll be meeting them? Asked Sarutobi, drawing everyone's attention to himself. The others hadn't thought of that. The message they received had only stated that Yusaka had information she urgently needed to share with them regarding the power surge. Very well then, I shall call him in then. Naruto, would you and Miyabi please come and join us? The others would like to meet you. Said Yusaka, a small smile on her face. Before anyone else could say anything, a pitch-black portal opened, and casually walking out of it they recognized Miyabi, who stood off to the side. Then walking slowly and calmly behind her sent shock through the ninja present. The white hair and clothing, the horns, and the legendary Rin Sharingan staring back at them from his left eye. Why hello there. My name is Naruto Ōtsutsuki, and this here is my assistant Miyabi. It's a pleasure to meet all of you. Said Naruto with a light bow. The others all stared in shock. Not only was the descendant of Yamato no Orochi here, but she was apparently the vassal of the only confirmed living Ōtsutsuki in the world. Not only did he have the Rin Sharingan, but evolved Byakugan as well. Onoki looked like he was going to have a heart attack. This was infinitely worse than anything he thought the power surge belonged to. A kami-damned Ōtsutsuki of all things. Rasa, like Onoki, was worried, but not the same reasons. He intrinsically put a value on all things, and the value of an Ōtsutsuki, specifically a young male one who was still young enough to likely want children. The gears began turning, trying to think of a way to try to help his people. After all, having an Ōtsutsuki as an ally far outweighed being an ally to any other faction in the whole country. To a degree was afraid as well, but for different reasons. His village had the sacred tools of the Sage of Six Paths, Hagoromo. Up till now almost no one had the ability to even pick up the damn things, let alone use them. What if the brat wanted them back? He would be able to use them no issue and be even more dangerous than he already was. Hiruzen, while shocked like the rest, had something nagging at him that the boy seemed familiar in some fashion. The shape of the boy's face reminded him of someone, but he knew he couldn't be her child, as she was in no way an Ōtsutsuki. Perhaps the clans shared a bit more than blood with them. May, well with her odd issue of wanting a husband, she began daydreaming about walking down the aisle, with Naruto as the groom. For Naruto however, he could barely hold the feelings back at seeing old man Sarutobi again. And as much as he wanted to go and hug him, as much as his new strength would probably break his back, he couldn't. He didn't exist in this world and didn't know the old man. But still, if they hadn't really changed, it stood to reason that everyone else he knew didn't either to some extent. So, an Ōtsutsuki, eh? You clearly look the part at the very least. I know most if not all of you are wary of me and what I can possibly do, but let me be frank. I merely want to live in peace with everyone. Are you afraid I'll stab you in the back later after gaining your trust? Because to be frank, that's stupid. After all, it's not like everyone here together, Yusaka included, would be any match for me. Even without Miyabi helping me, none of you are a threat to me, together or apart. That's the truth of it. Naruto said in a matter-of-fact tone, shocking everyone present. They understood that he was powerful, and likely spoke the truth of being more powerful than all of them, but to be brushed off so easily as if they weren't a threat. Now that they took offense to not a threat. Why you, Onoki begun to say, before Naruto's eyes bore into him, stopping him in his tracks. He had stared Madara Uchiha dead in the face when the man was alive, and even that feeling didn't compare to what he was experiencing now. The sheer powerlessness before this young man, it was horrible. Seeing that things were getting tense, and a fight would benefit no one in the end, Sarutobi saw fit to intervene. Come now, let's not resort to fighting. While I admit it was a bit cold how our young friend put it, let's be honest. Even if he was only half as capable as the Ōtsutsuki of old with his dojutsu as they were, what are the chances of us winning a fight? We know the stories, and even know of the power of those descended from the Ōtsutsuki. So really, what benefit would there to be fighting one of them when he wants to live peacefully amongst us? Said Sarutobi, emphasizing the last words. His pride did get hurt a bit at being deemed not a threat, but that hardly mattered when the young man genuinely wanted to live amongst them in harmony. He lived long enough to see the truth in his words, not that he seemed particularly good at lying anyway. There were enough problems in the world without needing to add an angry Ōtsutsuki who had who knows how much power at his hands now. Onoki would need to swallow his pride and feelings if it meant survival, because no one was likely to come to his aid if he genuinely angered Naruto. After all, what was dust released to the clan that had mastered chakra itself? No, this was the chance of a lifetime for the ninjas to hopefully come together, if not the yokai as well. As his clan had wholeheartedly accepted them and virtually joined with the monkey yokai, not all were so accepting of the yokai. But the Ōtsutsuki were the bridge in the past that connected the ninja and the yokai, even monster species from outside of Japan, to come for hope of a better life. And now here was another one, young, hopeful, and had a strong desire for peace. If through this young man, at the very least a lasting peace could come for the people of this land, he could die without regrets. I agree. Fighting would get us nothing, aside from unlikely deaths. Especially when I'm sure all of us can benefit from this. Said Rasa. The others likely knew he said that to try and see if he and his people could benefit as much as they could, and he didn't care. After all, it's not like the rest of them wouldn't to some extent try the same thing. They would be ignorant to look a gift horse like this in the mouth. Fine then. I was still reluctant about the whole thing. He still believed that at some point Naruto would come to his village, if only to reclaim the tools of his clansman Hagoromo. Everyone knew the great sage made those tools, and literally stood no ground on arguing on keeping them. The people who could use them were few and far between as it was. But whether the kid would want the items purely because they technically did belong to him or were one of the few things that posed a threat to him was cause for concern. After all, if they were usable against him, then it was possible he was only getting close to them to reclaim them before turning on them. Well, I for one wouldn't mind giving our new friend here a personal tour of my village, said May in an alluring tone. While some thought she was slutty, she hadn't gotten too close to men. It wasn't her fault they weren't man enough to try and handle her. Sure, she was kind of scary at times, but honestly, she just wanted to find a good man to settle down with. Was that such a bad thing? Onoki, finally being freed of whatever spell Naruto had put him under, breathed a sigh of relief. He did not like this brat at all. Sarutobi was right, if he even had proper control of even half of what his left eye could do, they were in trouble. That wasn't even counting what he could do with his right one. They didn't even know. Huh. You speak of wanting to live peacefully amongst us, yet we don't even know where you came from. Hell, no one knows where any Ōtsutsuki even went when the last ones disappeared centuries ago. Besides, if we're so little a threat to you as you say, then you won't mind sharing some information about yourself, said Onoki, making his displeasure known clear to everyone. But as much as some wanted to chastise him for acting like this, he had a point. They knew nothing about Naruto. Hell, as far as they knew, the Ōtsutsuki might as well have a full clan's worth of people in pocket dimension, and Naruto just decided to leave and explore. Very well, I'll tell you a bit about myself then. Name's Naruto Ōtsutsuki. Currently I'm 16 years old. I like ramen and orange. I hate people who break their word. That work for yak, he said with a cheeky smile. He knew what he wanted to know. About what he could do. More likely about exactly what the Tenseigan could do, as they had rumors and legends about it already. But the Tenseigan, only the cousin family to the Hyuga could achieve it, and it seemed like they didn't exist here, or were still on the moon. He might have to go up there and do something about that then. Naruto, if you mess with Onoki much longer like this, I'm sure he's going to have an aneurysm at this rate. While those things are nice to know, can you tell us about that right eye of yours at the very least? We have no records pertaining to that whatsoever. Though I'm sure you already figured that much out, didn't you? Asked a smirking Sarutobi. He was starting to like the young man. The more they interacted, the more he could see where the Uzumaki got their personalities from, as many of the ones he had met were like this too. They were a good-natured people that liked to enjoy themselves. Shrugging his shoulders, Naruto then pointed to his right eye. This eye is called the Tenseigan. It's effectively equal in power to a Rinnegan. It's the evolved form of a Byakugan, but whether any Hyuga have the capability to manifest one is another story. That good enough? Even with the simple explanation, all of them had stunned looks. An evolved Byakugan. They had suspected it was related, but a dojutsu evolution. Did that mean the Sharingan could evolve as well? They had no further time to ponder his words when Naruto loudly clapped his and began speaking again with a wide grin on his face. Since you guys are satisfied now, how about we get started on those tours of your villages, eh? Would love to see what you guys have done since my clan left all those years ago. In fact, since Gramps here seems like such a nice guy, why don't we go with his village first? Said Naruto, pointing to Hiruzen. He just wanted to get on with this. He really wanted to see his old friends alive again. Memories or not seeing them would put his mind at ease, and make this whole tangled mess worth it in his mind. Sarutobi blinked in surprise, not exactly expecting for him to want to come to his village first. But he supposed it made sense. His village did have the clans that were directly descended from his own. While it was unclear to him still as to what happened to the other Ōtsutsuki, he supposed it was better left unsaid for now. After all, even gods could die and be killed, so it was possibly this boy was the last of the main Ōtsutsuki family and wished to meet what was technically his extended family. But there was also something else that made him smirk internally. This whole meeting wasn't necessary. Naruto could come and go to any of the villages as he damn well pleased. It's not like they could do anything to stop him if they tried or wanted upon learning who he was. He was being nice, letting them know beforehand that he had come to their world, and was basically moving in. He probably didn't want to deal with any mass hysteria and panic had he just gone around visiting the villages unannounced and unaware he even existed. That would have been a disaster. At least this way they would be able to manage things marginally better. Naruto, however, was thinking of just who he would be seeing when he went to Konoha. I wonder, is there a separate dimensional me in this world now? Guess I'll find out when I get to Konoha. A young woman let out a small sneeze. Geez, is someone talking about me? She thought out loud to herself. She appeared to be in her mid to late teens with bright blonde hair done in a single long braid that went down to the middle of her back. For her age she had a rather well-developed figure, being shown off by fitting orange shirt and jean shorts. With her alluring blue eyes and round face made her quite attractive. But she had her face cutely scrunched up in confusion. There was something weird going on lately. First that large surge of chakra that basically everyone felt. Then the old man got called to Kyoto for emergency meeting a few days after that. And now this weird feeling in the pit in her gut that something was going to happen. What is this weird feeling? She wondered aloud. Come on Naruto, it's time to eat. She heard a woman yell. All right, coming mom. She yelled back, hurrying back inside of the house. While the meeting with the primary ninja leaders had gone over well, there was still another issue to take care of. The various yokai leaders that Yusaka directly ruled over. She couldn't very well let the ninja know without letting them know as well. There were already problems between the yokai and ninja, that she didn't need the former getting slighted because they weren't informed or even got to meet the Ōtsutsuki like the ninja did. So Yusaka had to try and get Naruto to stay in Kyoto a bit longer to have it settled, when he made it rather clear he wanted to visit the villages, which she understood why. As a mother, she could pick up on Naruto's loneliness that he felt and saw it as one who had been separated from their family for a long time. Which was technically true, as the Uchiha, Hyuga, Senju and Uzumaki were effectively distant cousins of his. But this brought up another concern that Sarutobi talked with her in private. It was likely Naruto was the only Ōtsutsuki left in all creation. As parents themselves, they felt bad for him. They were also thankful that he showed restraint and hadn't thrown damn near the entirety of Japan's supernatural world by just showing up out of the blue. What drew Yusaka's attention however was when Naruto reacted to her talking about the greater yokai. These were the rare few yokai whose power was so great that they were easily on par with her, some even exceeding hers. Especially his reaction to the most powerful one amongst them, a red nine-tailed fox whose power exceeded hers. He expressed great interest in meeting them, especially their leader, but visibly deflated when Yusaka explained that it was highly unlikely they would come. But that was mostly due to the fact they lived in pocket dimensions of their own creating and liked their solitude for the most part. But she quickly tried to raise his spirits that it was nearly impossible for them to not want to investigate his coming to this plane of existence when his power surged, so he would likely meet them soon. After all, they did keep an eye on things to some degree, and after realizing who he was, they would likely come to meet him. That seemed to calm him down somewhat. For Naruto, during the meeting there were a few yokai that stood out to him. The leader of the canine-based tribes, the Yuki Onna that had ice-based powers, and the leader of the Oni, ogre tribes. The ruler of all the canine-related clans, who had been the mate of the former ruler, was named Inukimi. She was apparently an Inu Daiokai, which was a much more powerful kind of yokai. She wore a purple and white kimono with green and yellow butterfly designs on it and wore a dark blue outer wrap that had a fur pelt, which wrapped around her chest. At the end of her outer wrap, there also was another fur pelt. In addition, she wore a light blue necklace with an amulet of the Mido stone. She has a light blue crescent moon symbol on her forehead, small purple lightning bolt marks underneath the outside corners of her eyes, along with golden slit eyes. She had what Naruto would describe as a rather regal beauty to her. From what Naruto could see, she seemed to have a certain playfulness to her. She still spoke to him in a calm and respectful manner. He was confused at first, till he remembered that as an Ōtsutsuki, just that alone he would be held in high regard, or disdain by some. Apparently, she was also old enough to have been around when Hagoromo and Hamura were still alive. And that was hundreds of years ago. When he voiced his disbelief that she could even be remotely that old, she politely laughed and thanked him for the unintended compliment. As a Daiokai, she saw it as her responsibility to watch over the weaker yokai under her command and had invited Naruto to her palace so she could properly thank him for what his clan had done for them. Then there was the leader of the Yuki Onna, Sarara Shirayuki. She has the appearance of a very youthful woman with purple-silver hair which is tied up, blue-purple eyes, and a lollipop of all things in her mouth, which was apparently a special kind to keep her cool in warmer climate. She wears a white kimono with a purple obi sash, and tabi socks with black zori sandals. Compared to Inukimi, her breasts were of a more modest size, but still on the bigger side. Hearing of her ice abilities, Naruto was immediately reminded of Haku, and wondered if the androgynous ice user had been reborn as a Yuki Onna. It was a distinct possibility, as when he asked about any ice-wielding ninja, she told him that there technically were, but they had effectively merged with the Yuki Onna long ago. They somewhat kept separate as that no matter what a Yuki Onna could only produce female offspring. It was believed that if the father was of a breed powerful enough it could override that, and they could have male offspring, something Sarara Natsu subtly wondered if Naruto would be interested in. The leader of the Oni tribe however was male. He was over 7 feet tall, and his skin was bright red. His name is Red Magnus and has red fiery hair. He wore nothing on his upper body aside from some large prayer beads around his neck. He wore reddish-brown pants that ballooned a bit which were tucked into his boots with golden shin guards. It was also abundantly clear the man was an idiot, but a good-natured one that Naruto saw himself easily getting along with. They had almost gotten into a fight, as Magnus when he first saw him said, he didn't look like much. This soon devolved into them hurling insults at one another. They would have had a full-on battle, but they managed to get talked out of it. Instead, they went with something less destructive. An arm wrestling competition. This proved to be a mistake. Red Magnus was physically strong enough that he could shatter mountains with ease and had the power to increase his own body mass and his own strength as well. Most would think that Magnus had this no contest. But to their surprise, Naruto made him work for it. He still lost, but he was certainly no pushover. The room they had used for their competition was ruined however. Being competitive men, they subconsciously released their power to try and one-up the other. They once again had to be forced to stop, lest their power keep being unleashed and the whole building be destroyed. By the end of it, Naruto had made a friend of Magnus, and promises to meet the lands of Inukimi and Sarara. Most of the other leaders hadn't either made much of an impression on him or didn't try to talk to him personally. There was however one thing that Yusaka warned Naruto about. The storm god Susanoo. Flashback. Naruto. I need you to be very careful of those who still see Miyabi as a threat. There are those who cannot see past the shadows of her father and grandfather and will want her eliminated or placed under strict control due to their fear and paranoia. Susanoo being chief amongst them. As one of the major gods of the Shinto pantheon, he is not one to be taken lightly. His hatred for Yamada no Orochi runs deep, maybe even deep enough to see you as an enemy as well. Yusaka warned. While Naruto was strong, she didn't want him to get into fight regardless if he could win or not. She just didn't want to see the young man hurt because despite knowing Miyabi's past and who she was, he still took her on as his vassal and therefore under the protection of the Ōtsutsuki name. That wasn't even counting those outside of Japan from other factions that wanted her dead, if only because she was descended from an evil dragon. Naruto stared right into Yusaka's eyes, and she was surprised at what she saw. The sheer will, determination and strength left her stunned. Yusaka, I really do appreciate the concern. But when I took Miyabi on as my vassal, for better or for worse she became my responsibility. I don't give a damn if she's descended from an evil dragon. I know that Miyabi is a good person and isn't like that. And if Susanoo can't get his head out of his ass enough to leave her alone, then they're going to have to deal with me personally. Said Naruto with conviction. While he wasn't too sure how his new powers would stack up against a literal god, especially when he hadn't perfected his new abilities, he wasn't going to let a prick of a god kill Miyabi, or worse. Miyabi, hearing this, was deeply touched by this. Sure, they hadn't known each other long, and while it would be within his rights to remove her from his service and leave her to fend for herself, he kept her despite her past. He was even willing to fight the storm god Susanoo, one of the most powerful being in the whole of the Shinto faction if it meant keeping her safe if need be. Sure, Amaterasu had somewhat stuck up for her, but at the time it was more like he was threatening Yusaka, any yokai and ninja that would get in his way of dealing with her. She felt her cheeks heat up at the thought of Naruto valiantly fighting for her. Very well Naruto, since you're this determined, I'll leave this matter to you. Although if I didn't know any better I'd say you were Prince Charming swearing he would protect his beloved princess. Said it teasing Yusaka, getting Naruto to try and splutter out a denial, and Miyabi to be left with her mouth open in shock. Konoha, during the yokai clan leader meetings. Sarutobi let out a long sigh, having just gotten done with the meeting of the various clans in the village. He had only been given a handful of days to get things ready for Naruto's arrival, and knew he had to inform the clan heads, especially the Hyuga, Uchiha, and Uzumaki Senju. The Uzumaki and Senju had combined into one clan again, due to both having suffered losses over the years, and now lived in the same compound. Flashback. So, when is he coming to visit? Asked Kushina with a smile. Everyone turned to her with incredulity's look on their face. What good is worrying about which eyes he has, or whose blood he has? You people are all forgetting that this is still a person we're talking about, not some kind of prize horse to use for breeding. Yes, I realize exactly how serious this situation is and how bad things can get if the wrong people find out. But this young man is, however distant it may be, family to some of us here. And as his family, we have a responsibility to help him out now that he's here," said Kushina, somewhat appalled at how the others were acting. Hiyoshi and Makoto winced at the jab and looked suitably chastised. "Also, when he gets here, can you two make sure to keep your people under control? You can say what you want about how informal and all that my clan is, but some members of your clan have massive egos, and we don't need their attitudes screwing this up. We can't afford for this Naruto to think his only remaining family is a bunch of pricks that are only sucking up to him because of his name," said Kushina, earring glares from the other two clan heads. Flashback end. While they hadn't been happy with the jab, they knew better than to argue with her on that point. Out of the three, they did in fact have the only descendants of the sage who got big heads from it. This usually lead to fights with the other clans, until the Uzumaki typically stepped in, embarrassed the person bad enough to set them straight. But she had a point nonetheless. They absolutely could not afford to scare Naruto off, if only so that he could live peacefully with his extended family. A knock at his door interrupted from his thoughts. Knowing full well who it was and what they wanted, he mentally prepared himself for the conversation to follow. "Come in, Danzo. This wasn't going to be a pleasant conversation. I had been nearly another week since the meeting with the yokai leaders, and now Naruto was ready to head to Konoha. He did his best to remain calm on the outside, but inside he was a mess of emotions. This is what he had gone through all this trouble for. Of going against his moral code to basically devour and take the power of the Ōtsutsuki, to even be to use the Sharingans, to attempt time travel. It didn't work, but everyone he knew was still alive, and then some. His mother, Kushina, was alive as well. Not that she really was in this reality, but that wasn't the point. He hadn't been able to get much word on Minato for some reason, but he figured he'd find out eventually. And lastly, there was these realities, him, or in this case, her. Naruto. While he had felt that it was kind of lazy, that reality seemed to have taken his jutsu form of Naruto, and just made her a real person. Though that was the real issue, wasn't it? How he would be able to handle a him that hadn't had their life completely screwed over, and at least one parent was a part of their life. Would he be jealous, or happy? The same with his old friends. Would he be depressed that these were essentially strangers that shared their faces, or at ease they were still alive, even without memories of him? There was only so long he could hold off going to Konoha. Now he was just waiting on his escort to Konoha. He would have left sooner, but with how much the world had changed, he had no bloody idea where it was anymore. That and apparently not everyone could be told about Miyabi being his vessel, and essentially off limits unless they wanted to cross him due to his existence being kept a secret. The yokai and ninja had enough problems with the devils trying to appropriate their people for their damned evil pieces. Let alone other factions for their own purposes. Miyabi. Our guide, who were they again? Asked Naruto, wondering where their guard even was. Nodding in agreement at that, Miyabi said, our guide was to be a prominent ninja of Konoha. Which one I wasn't sure. The other was apparently suggested by Lady Inukimi herself, to show us the way to her palace, as she oversees the yokai near Konoha. This was to happen at some point after we got to Konoha. Naruto was about to respond, but sensing something coming up behind them at great speed, Naruto quickly turned around and created a truth-seeking ball in preparation of an attack. Behind him soon appeared a purple-haired woman, who held her hands up as a sign of surrender, her eyes wide as Naruto now held the transformed bow staff just an inch from her neck. My apologies, my lord. The Hokage has sent me to be your guide. The code word is Old Monkey. She said, getting Naruto to slowly lower and will the bow staff away. The code word had been Sarutobi's idea before he left, but Naruto had suggested the actual word. It was quite funny seeing the irritated face he made, knowing it was a jab at himself. But still, he really didn't like all this nobility stuff. There was sadly nothing he could do at this point. The Ōtsutsuki had been revered and feared far and wide, and there was little doubt there would be at least some amongst the ninja who would probably worship him in some fashion. To put it mildly, while the Uchiha, Hyuga and Uzumaki Senju were high-ranking noble families, as a pure blood, of the Ōtsutsuki main family as he basically was, he outranked all of them. Sure, he wanted to be Hokage at one point, but this. Izuna admitted that if he wanted to, with his power and bloodline he could likely take over the entirety of Japan's supernatural world, barring the Shinto pantheon. Having the entire country united under a banner of peace and unity like that sounded nice, but to be their ruler. He wasn't sure he was ready for that. Well, one thing at a time. First, he had to get to Konoha and see how much had changed. Then came trying to figure out how to contact the Biju. He hoped that somewhere at least Kurama remembered him, because if not, then was the jump through the portal worth it? His friends wouldn't remember him, his alternate self was living with a family he'd always wanted even. He wasn't sure he could handle that grumpy-ass fox not remembering him either. The travel to Konoha had been thankfully quiet for the most part. Naruto thanked the professionalism that Anbu had regarding their job, as with the anxiety building up at getting closer and closer to Konoha, he wasn't in the mood for talking. However, he had been sorely tempted to ask about the other people who had been following them, he guessed attempting to remain just out of sensory range of his Tenseigen, which still had the abilities of a Byakugan. Thinking on it, it still had some absurd abilities. Especially as he assimilated Kagaya and her abilities, he gained her ability to see through one's thoughts and feelings. While he hadn't perfected it, let alone while traveling at high speeds, he could feel well enough that they weren't a threat. More like extra security of some kind. Suppose it made sense. After all, while Anbu were strong, the woman guiding him didn't compare to Miyabi's power, let alone his. Was almost like a child trying to be a guard to an adult. As Naruto made no moves to show he knew the other groups, he was aware of them, they kept up their mission given to them by their clan heads. Makoto, Hiyashi and Kushina all sent a team of their clansmen to watch over the group in case something happened. After all, a single Anbu could only do so much. Group 1 Uchiha. Damn, wish we could get closer to get a better look at the Ōtsutsuki. Grumbled Shisui Uchiha. While he had an unusual personality, being more humble and down to earth compared to most Uchiha. HN. Came the reply of his companion. Quite possibly the strongest Uchiha that had been seen in generations, Izumi Uchiha. She was quite the desirable woman, but her stoic demeanor made it hard for men to try and court her, let alone talk to her. After all, her flowing raven hair that reached to her back in a ponytail, heart-shaped face, blemish-free and fair skin, firm breasts and ass made her effectively a model not only in looks but skill many young kunoichi aspired for. Her mother, high priestess of the Uchiha, had of course selected Shisui and herself for the unofficial escort mission to make sure that the only living Ōtsutsuki that had been seen in centuries made it back to Konoha safely. When she had been told one had been seen, let alone wanted to come to Konoha, she didn't know how to respond. But after seeing a picture of what Naruto looked like, as Sarutobi had one taken and copies made to be given to the clans, she knew this was serious. And she had to admit, he didn't look too bad. Next to no men or women for that matter had caught her attention, and many believed her to be. But this. Her curiosity was piqued with so many questions. Where exactly did he come from? Why did he choose now to come here? Was he as friendly as he portrayed, or was he another Kagaya in the making? And if he did truly come in peace, was there something else he was after? So many questions. Group 2, Hyuga. The group of Hyuga, which consisted of main family members, as this was too important for branch members, were much quitter than the Uchiha counterparts. Well, mostly it was Shisui talking, but still. They were far too tense to make any conversation. After all, the one they had been assigned to guard had an evolved Byakugan, of all things. There had been no records of this. But Hiyashi assured them it was true, and as such they needed to be extra sure nothing happened. Even if it meant they wouldn't come back alive. Group 3. The final group of Uzumaki members were there to keep an eye on the other two groups. Their matriarch Kushina highly doubted that their guest was in any real danger, and that the other clans were just being overly paranoid. That, or wanted to see if they could use the chance to earn some brownie points with him should something happen. The Hyuga and Uchiha had always been in a kind of competition with each other over their noble status, which she found quite dumb. The Uchiha structure their clan in a more spiritual monk-like way, and the Hyuga went with a traditional noble way. She figured it was their ancestors trying to use the fame of their ancestors to gain what influence they could. And it made sense. After all, many of those descended couldn't hope to even reach the level of power wielded by Ashura or Indra, let alone their father or uncle. Hell, even attempts at reproducing the Rinnegan naturally, and some unnaturally, hadn't worked. Either way, Lady Kushina had been exasperated by the whole situation, and they understood. They just hoped things wouldn't get worse. 2 days of travel later. The time had finally arrived. Naruto now stood outside the gates of Konoha, and they looked just like they always had. Memories began flooding back to him, and he soon lost himself in nostalgia. He didn't even notice right away as Miyabi began poking his arm to try to get his attention. Eventually he snapped out of it, and she motioned to their guide, Yugao, who had been giving him a concerned look which he waved off. "I'm fine." You and the other guard teams did a fine job. Though some of them need to learn how to keep their cool a bit better. One group was so tense I thought they were constipated. Naruto said, leaving a stunned Yugao as he began his walk into the village. What other teams? She thought to herself. Leaving it for later, she quickly caught up to him to guide him to the tower. After they had left, Izumi was slowly walking out into the clearing and raised her hand. A crow landed on it and she brought it down to her face. So, he was aware of us the whole time. And here we all thought we had been able to stay out of his range. So, does that mean the range of his Tensagen that much stronger than we anticipated? Most curious. Either way, it was time for her to report to her mother. While no one had thankfully attacked, she had been instructed to notify her if she had managed to learn anything from her crow. Hokage office. Hiruzen was working on some papers when he heard a knock at the door. Knowing who it was as Yugao had sent a messenger bird ahead of time. Welcome Naruto. I take it your trip was without incident then. Sarutobi said, glancing at Yugao who nodded. Of course. Not that we were likely to face a threat that Miyabi would have had trouble with, let alone me. Naruto said with confidence, making Miyabi nod. Yugao could only mentally sigh. She knew that she didn't compare to either of them in power, but did he have to completely disregard her like that? Chuckling at the response, Sarutobi looked at the young man in front of him. It still didn't feel real that he was standing before what only a couple weeks ago was little more than legend. But it was real. And he hoped no one in the village, or the other ones for that matter, tried to ruin things. So then, what's next? I assume by now you've informed the clans to receive me. If not to some degree, the whole village. Which begs the question. Which of the clans tried their hardest to convince you to have me visit them first? Naruto asked with a small grin. None of the clans would dare pass up the opportunity to have him at least visit their compound. But honestly, he was still nervous about meeting the Uzumaki. His mother, technically speaking, was alive in this world, so he hoped he didn't break down in front of her. It was bad enough when he met her chakra imprint, but fully alive. Might be a bit much. Are you sure you don't want to take a day to rest before meeting them? You did arrive at least a day early. Nah, I'm good. Besides, I assume at least one member of each extra team was from one of the clans, and would have reported that I had arrived, so they should be good to go. Naruto said casually, making Sarutobi's eyes widen in surprise. Naruto, I only sent Yugao to keep things as discreet as possible. What other teams are you talking about? Sarutobi asked, hoping a certain someone or the other Kage hadn't been using the chance to spy on Naruto. You didn't. Huh. From what I could tell, none of them had any hostile intent toward me, and they tried to stay out of what I assume was they thought was the range of my Tensagen. Never mind, I can sense their intention toward me, and there was a lot of tenseness, eagerness, and irritation, but nothing resembling hostility. Explained Naruto. He didn't really care that he just divulged his capability with his Tensagen, but he didn't really care. Sarutobi let out an irritated sigh at the news. While intrigued at what Naruto said about himself, he was more concerned about what the clans had done behind his back. They were lucky Naruto hadn't considered them a threat and tried to engage them. Thank you for informing me. And I deeply apologize that the clans acted in such a way, while understandable, was done entirely without my authorization. They will be dealt with accordingly. Said a serious Sarutobi. Naruto merely smiled awkwardly, not knowing he had just gotten a bunch of people in trouble. Oops. He was about to open his mouth to go back to talking about what clan to visit, when the door burst open. Turning, Naruto's breath stopped as it revealed none other than Naruko. And while it kind of felt weird to be checking out his alternate reality self, he had to admit she was quite attractive. While her hair wasn't in the twin pigtails his jutsu form had, it went down to the middle of her back. Her skin was just a bit tanner than his own, showing like him, she spent a good deal of time outside. She stood at about 5'6", which was actually quite tall for her age, as most women typically didn't get to even 5'10" by adulthood, so she was likely to at least reach that. Wearing the normal open-toed sandals and green shorts that showed off her shapely hips and nice legs. She wore an open orange hoodie, which he mentally smirked at the color, and a dark red shirt that really didn't hide her well-developed chest. Her face was round, much like his own, and her eyes were widened in shock and mouth agape, likely she realized just who exactly he was. Naruko, however, was trying not to physically show how much she was freaking out. She just wanted to bug the old man for a mission as she was bored. But no, her impatience surely landed her in hot water this time. Her mother had told her of the Ōtsutsuki and showed her what he looked like. She was surprised that she and her mother shared a couple physical characteristics with him but chalked that up to show he was more related to them than the other clans. Up close she had to admit he did look handsome and the Tenseigan and Rinnesharingan were quite mesmerizing to look at. Letting out a sigh, Sarutobi tried his best to not get irritated. Of course, Naruto would pick now of all times to burst into his office. But if she was here, then likely her team wasn't far behind. Naruto, you really shouldn't Oh my. Welcome to Konoha. Kakashi said lamely as he came into the room and saw Naruto. Naruto however mentally chuckled, as even now Kakashi hadn't changed whatsoever. Naruto. Came a voice from the doorway, and he saw Sakura rushing in and bowing before him. Lord Ōtsutsuki. I'm deeply sorry for my idiot teammate and anything she may have done to upset you. She quickly got out in a frantic tone. Of course, she was the more normal one of the team and so, this is what all the commotion is about. I'm honestly surprised to see you here so soon, Lord Ōtsutsuki. On behalf of the Uchiha clan, I welcome you to Konoha and I hope my idiot teammate didn't offend you. Came a smooth voice from behind Kakashi, who turned to let Naruto get a better view. He felt his eye twitch at what he was seeing. Seriously, did Jiraiya influence him more than he realized? Or did this have to do with that one time he and Sasuke got into a dumb fight about the jutsu, and who could pull it off better? Because standing in the doorway was a distinctly female Sasuke. Of course, why not? She stood about an inch shorter than Naruto and wore clothes very similar to how Sasuke dressed before he left the village. Her hair at least didn't resemble a duck's ass, and was straighter and looked almost like silk, going down to her back and tied near the end, with bangs framing her face. Though the dark blue shirt seemed a bit tight around her large chest, and the shorts really showed off her ass. Seriously, if any more of his friends were turned into attractive women like this was going to be a problem. It was already weird enough that was checking out what was basically his twin sister he never had, and now this. He mentally cursed Jiraiya for doing this to him. It's no problem really. Me and Sarutobi here were just about done when Naruto and you all came in. He said with a smile. They kind of were done already, so it wasn't really that big of a deal. Even so. Naruto did come in here without permission during our meeting. Normally such an action isn't really a problem, but this case is different. One cannot simply burst into a meeting with dignitaries, let alone one of your stature. Sarutobi said, making Naruto flinch. Yeah, she was in trouble now. Naruto took a thinking pose, with his hand cupping his chin in thought. Well, if it was a punishment he wanted to give her, he figured he could help with that. With a loud clap of his hands, everyone turned their attention to him. Well then, if it's a punishment she's to be given, why not have her, and her team if they want, be my escort? After all, since she and her team came here for a mission in the first place, why not take advantage of them already being here? Are you sure? That's not exactly a punishment, asked Kakashi. Everyone else agreed with him. Playing tour guide, while annoying, wasn't the worst job in the world. Oh, that's because you didn't let me finish. You see, I don't exactly have a lot of money on me currently, so the four of you are going to be paying for mine and Miyabi's food as we go around the village. And I should warn you, I have a big appetite. Naruto finished with a devilish smile, making the rest of them pale. What? But Naruto was the only one who busted through the door. Said an indignant Sakura. Yes, but as her teammates you should have stopped her before entering the room. If not curtailed such behavior long ago. It's not befitting of a ninja, let alone one from an esteemed clan to act in such a way. Miyabi said, speaking for the first time. Nodding in approval, Sarutobi continued. Miyabi is correct. Naruto, while I don't mind you visiting from time to time, you cannot just barge into a room like this. I had hoped you had learned your lesson after the time you interrupted my meeting with the Daiokai who visited. He sternly told her. By this point she was kneeling while hugging her knees to her chest, with an aura of depression around her. She remembered that one all too well. The near emotionless and somewhat better than you aura the Daiokai did not go well with the expressive and outgoing Uzumaki. Relations had been tense for a while after that but thankfully smoothed over. Satsuki, while not happy about having to pay out of pocket for Naruto's blunder, wasn't all that upset. If she could make a decent impression on the Ōtsutsuki, then it wouldn't be so bad. And there was the off chance she could learn about himself, and possibly what he was capable of. And if she was lucky enough, possibly down the line snag him as her husband. The Uchiha clan already had an in somewhat with the Shinto gods, as her mother being the head priestess could get into contact with Amaterasu directly just as Yusaka could for the yokai. And while harems for such powerful beings weren't uncommon, she was damned if she didn't at least try and take the reins of it as the head wife. She was a young woman who knew what she wanted, and while not an ideal situation, she wasn't going to let this slip through her fingers. It wasn't as though she was some kind of gold digger or only after him for his name, but it was more of she had high standards for a man and was certain Naruto would blow them out of the water. Naruto, oblivious to Satsuki's line of thinking, was amused at the scene in front of him. At least Satsuki wasn't an asshole like her previous self and had a better personality. Sakura and Kakashi so far seemed the same, and Naruto was basically a happier version of himself. He could tell that the deep-seated depression and hatred was not present within her, as up this close the Tenseigan allowed him to see her emotions. But there was something in her chakra. Was it perhaps Ashura? Or something else? Jinchuriki didn't exist in this world, as the Biju were Daiokai instead, and they lived in their own pocket dimension. He would have to ponder this later, as now it was time for free food. A few hours later. It was absurd. The amount of food that had been devoured was maddening. Miyabi they could somewhat understand as she was technically of dragon blood, but Naruto was the real shocker. He was out eating her. Even Naruto couldn't believe it. And she was able to put away over a dozen bowl of ramen. They had visited a couple places already, and soon discovered that Naruto seemed to be a bottomless pit. Just where was he putting it? This isn't so bad. Yeah. Sure, cooking isn't my specialty, but I'm sure that with anything I can get it down with enough practice. Besides, it's not like he's going to always be able to eat this much, right? Wondered a slightly nervous Satsuki. Kakashi however had a different line of thought. Well, this is certainly different. If I didn't know any better I'd think that this was just a normal young man, not someone with enough power to wipe out the entire village as easily as breathing. Still, I'm curious how she became his vassal of all people. Hope he knows what he's doing. Sakura had thankfully gotten over her initial nervousness, as opposed to the rest of her team she wasn't used to dealing with high-ranking nobles, let alone someone like this. Miyabi was another problem for her altogether. Satsuki and Naruto however were helping her ease up around Naruto and Miyabi. Naruto said, stopping suddenly as he felt something bit his leg. Looking down, he noticed it was a little girl, around 8 years old. She was a cute little thing, with her short dark brown hair. Wearing a little dark blue sundress with red shoes. She was rubbing her forehead, which he guessed was where she hit his leg with. Aya. Came the voice of a woman who was running up to her and rushed to her side. She too had dark brown hair and was wearing a yellow sundress herself. After checking on her daughter, she looked at Naruto, and her eyes widened in terror. Lord Ōtsutsuki, she said quietly. By this point the rest of the people in the street had stopped what they were doing and were looking on in silence. Naruto was about to jump in to help, but Kakashi held her back. She was about to protest, but the serious look in his visible eye stopped her, and she relented. She of course knew why, but she didn't like it. In the days when Kagaya was around, her power was fearsome. So much so that she slaughtered scores of gods, monsters, and powerful warriors who sought her out for their own selfish desires. Even her children, though not as powerful, had defeated their fair share of powerful enemies. Through the Rinne Sharingan and the fabled 10-tailed beast she supposedly controlled, Japan had become a major force, catapulting the already great power that Japan had. For this very reason the people feared and revered those of the Ōtsutsuki. Madara Uchiha and Hashirama Senju were among the strongest descendants of the sage's bloodline, but even they didn't possess a Rinne Sharingan, let alone the mysterious Tenseigan Naruto had. As such they feared Naruto greatly. Some believed that the Rinne Sharingan itself caused her to go mad, and that Naruto himself was little different than the goddess Kagaya. For this exact reason everyone feared for the little girl and her mother would be wiped from existence. As Naruto turned to them fully, the mother hugged her daughter close to her chest, shaking in fear. Getting down on one knee, he slowly reached his hand out. Fearing the worst, she clutched her daughter tighter, and closed her eyes. Is your daughter okay? I'm sorry for not looking where I was going and bumping into her like that. He said as he put his hand on her shoulder. She slowly looked up in surprise at him. He wasn't angry. Moreover, they weren't being annihilated. I'm okay. I'm a big girl so it didn't hurt. The little girl, Aya said with a grin. Oh really? Well that's good to hear. Naruto said, helping the mother and daughter back on their feet. Looking around, the gathered crowd had stunned looks on their faces. It took them a moment for them to realize that Naruto was looking at them, and soon dispersed. Shrugging his shoulders, Naruto turned back to the mother and daughter and bid them a good day. Going back to his guides, he saw all of them smiling at him. What? Naruto wondered aloud. Oh, nothing, nothing. Anyway, was there anywhere else you wanted to go, or should we call it a day? Asked Kakashi, as it was in the late afternoon now. In an hour or so it was going to get dark. Perhaps we should figure out lodging for our stay here, sir. We are going to be here for some time. Miyabi said. And she had a point. They hadn't really figured out where they were going to be staying exactly. She didn't mind staying outdoors, as she had been doing that for years, but it wouldn't look good if her lord slept outside like vagabond. Yeah, I guess you're right. We should. He stopped suddenly, something catching his attention. His eyes widening slightly at a familiar sight. Ichiraku Ramen. The stand itself being a bit larger than he remembered, but it was no doubt the same place. Ichiraku Ramen. No tour of Konoha would be complete without at least one bowl. Said an ecstatic Naruto, having followed Naruto's line of sight. You can't be serious. After all the fancy restaurants we visited today, we're going to end things off at a ramen place. Said an incredulity's Satsuki with Sakura silently agreeing. Hey, what do you mean, just a ramen place? Ichiraku Ramen is better than all the other places we've been to by far. Naruto said in an indignant tone. That's only because you may as well breathe the stuff instead of air. Honestly, if it wasn't for your Uzumaki genetics, you would be huge with how much you eat. Satsuki said, glaring at Naruto. They were about to get into another one of their fights, when Kakashi interrupted them. Well, it certainly looks like he's interested in some ramen, considering he's already inside of the stall. He said, making the two of them turn to see. And indeed, he and Miyabi were now seated and already ordering. Naruto took this opportunity to flash Satsuki a smile and a victory sign with her fingers, before running into the stall to join them. Sakura let out a sigh and followed, while Satsuki stood there and let out an irritated sigh before going in as well. Hey, while I wasn't expecting this, it looks like a taste for ramen might just be an inherited thing. Kakashi said amusedly to himself. After they got in and ordered, and Naruto having to hold himself back from seeing old man Tucci and Ayame again, they dug into their food. Everyone, even Satsuki, were enjoying the pleasant atmosphere the little shop gave off. Naruto managed to make small talk with the others, as just being in Konoha, in the ramen stand filled him with warmth, like the war that ruined his world never happened, and everything was like before. After they finished a couple bowls, the happy mood was interrupted by a voice. Naruto, come out here right now. Yelled an angry female voice, one most of them knew quite well. Mom. Fancy meeting you here. Naruto said as she came out of the booth, earning her a glare from Kushina. Do you have any idea how long I've been looking for you? I told you that you were supposed to be home by now for clan matters, and here you are eating ramen. I know ramen is great, but seriously. She said, shaking her head in disappointment, making Naruto puff out her cheeks in indignation. But mom, I'm on an escort mission. Here, let me show you. She said, going inside the stall before her mother could respond. When she got back out, whatever she was about to say died in her throat as she got a good look at Naruto, whom Naruto was pulling out of the booth. Naruto. There, standing right outside the stall, was one of the main people he didn't think he would be able to handle seeing. Kushina Uzumaki, alive and well. The irritated look on her face was quickly replaced with a gobsmacked one, and despite that she was every bit as beautiful as he remembered when he met her in the seal. Nice to meet you. Naruto said lamely. Shit, this wasn't how I wanted this to go at all. I'm not ready for this. He screamed internally. What? But I thought someone explained. Now. Said a thoroughly confused Kushina. Just how the hell had this happened? Very well. Me and Milord were meeting with the Hokage, when Naruto burst in before we were done. As punishment, she and her team were take us on a tour of the village while paying for our food. Miyabi said in a matter-of-fact tone. Kushina facepalmed after the explanation. Of course, she burst into the office. Now he probably thinks the Uzumaki are a bunch of idiots. Kushina lamented in her thoughts. Oh, this was just perfect. Hey now, it wasn't all that bad. We got to spend some time in good company and had a nice bowl of ramen to finish things off. Besides, by the time she came into the office, me and the old monkey were basically done discussing things anyway, so it's not really that big of a deal. Naruto said, trying to smooth things over. Kushina blinked in surprise, before a smile crept onto her face. Old monkey huh, she said before she started laughing, remembering how her daughter, and herself at times called Sarutobi. After a few moments she managed to calm herself down and look at Naruto with a broad smile on her face. You know what, I think we're going to get along just fine. Kushina said, making Naruto give a small smile as well. This may not have been the meeting with his mother he wanted, but it would suffice. But he wondered, how long would he be able to keep his emotions at bay before the dam burst? So, an Ōtsutsuki A. And here I thought all that was left was the diluted blood of their descendants. And with that thing no less. This changes things, said a masculine voice to itself in a dark room. Thanks for watching.